Pass fail global leaders. This is what it looks like on the ground. Aleppo's agony, plain for all to see. But as diplomacy lies in ruins, so too does any prospect of ending it. Good evening. After a weekend in which Aleppo's beleaguered citizens described bombing of unprecedented ferocity, today they report medical supplies running out and hospitals overwhelmed by casualties. Moscow says there's no prospect now of peace talks. And after Western envoys walked out of an emergency UN session accusing Russia of war crimes, no one knows when the Syrian nightmare will end or how. And if the international community has no comfort to offer the 250,000 citizens trapped in Aleppo, for the lucky few who make it here to the migrant camp in Calais, political leaders have little better solution. The French president visited today, starting a diplomatic row with Britain over how and when it should be cleared. Also tonight, double murderer Christopher Halliwell may have killed half a dozen more. The former detective who arrested him tells us of his fears in his first TV interview.
Well, he gave very clear indication that there were 8 murders at least. I have no idea, there may be more.
And in the US, it's only hours before the first presidential debate here on Long Island when Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump meet on stage for the very first time. As their teams walk through final preparations, the stakes could not be higher. The polls are desperately close, with an expected television audience of 100 million viewers.
And good evening from the Labour Party conference here in Liverpool, where the party's shadow chancellor, John McDonnell, detects new winds of change, the withering of capitalism and the socialism. We should be talking to him live. As so often, Trident has played a part here. Is this the moment the party's defence spokesman, Clive Lewis, discovers the line in his speech on not overturning party policy on Trident was sunk by the leader's office at the very last moment? And Michael Crick has been to a Labour constituency here in the northwest where they voted for Brexit to hear voters' views on Jeremy Corbyn.
What do you think of Jeremy Corbyn?
Rubbish.
Why is that?
He's an old clown. He's rubbish. He's not fit for anything, that one. He won't shoveling coal or something like that.
Do you see him as a future Prime Minister?
Get off it. You're joking.
The bombardment is relentless. The diplomacy is in ruins. The Syrian city of Aleppo now hit by bombs designed to strike deep underground. Hell itself, say residents. Assad's forces determined to seize control of their city, whatever the cost. The airstrikes hit eastern parts of the city, home to 250,000 people. Activists claim around 240 people have been killed since the latest government offensive began on Thursday, most of the dead in the rebel-held east. And just to warn you, there are distressing images in this report by our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson.
East Aleppo. Take these streets, and the Syrian government, with Russian air support, has taken Syria's biggest city. It would be by far the biggest gain for President Assad in 6 years of war. 250,000 civilians trapped here, either because the Islamist rebel groups are stopping them leave, or they're just terrified of the Russian and Syrian bombardment. The UN confirmed to Channel 4 News today that the Russians have set up 8 supposedly safe corridors out of this area, but nobody's coming down them. Instead, they stay there, hurrying to the city's clinics to give blood.
For the past week, Russian warplanes have intensified the frequency of their raids over all liberated neighborhoods of Aleppo. They're now targeting us with thermobaric, cluster and phosphorus bombs, leading to great destruction and many injured people received by the hospital.
And they need that blood. For every air raid by the Syrian government jets or Russian aircraft sends a pitiful aftershock to the nearest overstretched triage point. I'm okay now, he tells the doctor. Go and see to someone else. There are plenty of others to see to. But the Russians and the Syrian government are not the only ones indiscriminately killing civilians. Rebels in East Aleppo are, of course, targeting government-held suburbs where thousands of civilians live. It's also true that the Russians and Syrians do allow civilians and even armed rebels safe evacuation from besieged areas across the country. This is it happening after Daraya fell a few weeks ago. The same thing happened in Homs today, but on and on it goes. The rebels accusing the government of shelling civilian areas, the government accusing rebels of using civilians as human shields.
International law is clear. The systematic use of indiscriminate weapons in densely populated area is a war crime.
And again today, we see that when it suits both sides, progress can happen. Thus it was that aid reached several locations across the war zone, many besieged for months today. Syrian military TV distributing these images. And back in East Aleppo, in a lull in the fighting, a flooded bomb crater becomes a swimming pool. Aleppo's agony is that neither side seems ready or willing to organise either aid convoys in or people out, especially those who desperately need medical care.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke via the internet to Wissam Zarqa, an English teacher in Aleppo. I began by asking him about what the situation there had been like over the last few days.
Okay, there have been bad days before, but now the siege makes things much worse. We don't have enough fuel, which makes getting water much more difficult. The bombing today, the shelling today is less than the previous 2 days, but still a lot of shelling. Doctors are overwhelmed with a lot of injuries and casualties. As for food, I guess many people still have little food stored, but food is running out anyway.
You're talking very calmly about all of this, but it sounds absolutely terrifying. Just describe to me what goes through your mind on a daily basis under this kind of bombardment.
We are not the first place to be besieged here in Syria. Madaya, for example, has been in the countryside of Damascus, has been besieged for years now. If I am to panic now, I guess I wouldn't take it. So we know that we should just be calm and take it easily to know what to do. This is the idea. If we panic, we would be lost. The countries like Russia, America, it seems that they've agreed to have us in this condition, besieged.
So tell us, this weekend, what was it like with these bunker-busting bombs that we're hearing about? What made you aware that this was of a different magnitude?
Yeah, this is different. This is the first time we see big holes in the ground, 4, 5 meters sometimes. And sometimes it looks just pointless.
A lot of people hearing what you've said and what the people of Aleppo are going through ask, why on earth do you stay? Can you answer that for us?
Yeah. Take me as an example. I came back from Saudi Arabia 1 year and a half ago because it's my duty. I am a teacher. I should teach. Now I teach at university here. I teach at schools. There aren't enough teachers. So, if everybody runs away, who's going to run this country?
Wissam Zarqa, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And later in the programme, we'll be speaking to the man who's heading up the UN's humanitarian access to Aleppo, Jan Egeland. And you can see all of our films from inside Aleppo on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Well, the global implications of Syria's war go way beyond its borders, of course. The millions who have fled helping to fuel Europe's migrant crisis. In Calais today, the French President, François Hollande, provoked a furious reaction as he declared Britain should play its part in managing security and humanitarian efforts once the so-called jungle migrant camp is shut down. Many MPs here are highly sceptical it will happen at all. From Calais, Porrick O'Brien reports.
Today, the jungle Calais took centre stage in the French presidential campaign. At least it did, from a distance. President Hollande flew over the camp on his way to formal engagements in Calais town, his first visit in 4 years. A lot of politics plays out here. Like, for example, the politics of Raqqa, Syria. The so-called capital of so-called IS is where 15-year-old Ahmed calls home. From his bunk bed in the camp, a matter-of-fact teenage account of the aftermath of an explosion.
A truck blew up, and we were all on the ground. After, we were picking up body parts and putting them in bags. These were all people that were dead.
Ahmed is alone, but for the young men he shares his container in the camp with, trying to get to extended family in Glasgow, textbook unaccompanied minor with a case for resettlement by the UK government, but for now stuck in a metal container, part of its cargo, children of conflict. Across town, President Hollande vowing to dismantle the camp. Word is it will happen within the next 4 weeks. Today, he also spoke of the UK's responsibility to people like Ahmed.
I also would like to restate that I am determined to see the British authorities play their part in the humanitarian effort that France is undertaking here, and will continue to undertake in the future. Although the United Kingdom has taken a sovereign decision, it still must honour its obligation to France.
The president, in the popularity poll doldrums, has not yet declared his candidacy in the elections next year. Assuming he does, the security of Calais, successfully dismantling the camp, will play big. There's a reason, of course, Hollande is visiting Calais now after all these years. Presidential elections next year. France is entering campaign mode. If he decides to throw his hat into the ring, he'll have Sarkozy to the right of him and Marie Le Pen to the far right of him. So welcome again to the politics of wall building. The foundation for a wall along the motorway to supplement miles of fencing that secure the port, paid for by the UK. Hollande says he's determined to dismantle the camp in a humanitarian way. But the last time they tried, this happened.
Go, go, go!
And what of the 700 plus unaccompanied minors? One charity boss told us they could accommodate just 75 of them if the camp was dismantled this year. Ahmed and his friends then, uncertain futures, stunned in the headlights of difficult politics.
Well, at this moment of global crisis, the world will be watching America tonight as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton face off in their first presidential debate. In a race which could hardly be closer, this is an outcome which no one will be able to predict. The Real Clear Politics poll average shows a statistical dead heat. Hillary Clinton just 2 points ahead on 45.7% and Donald Trump on 43.4%. But her lead is well within the margin of error. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is outside the debate venue in Hempstead, New York. Kylie.
Well, yes, Kathy, this could be a truly defining and dramatic moment for both campaigns, potentially, not only because of this massive predicted television audience, but also certainly because of the closeness of these polls. They are so finely poised, as you described. But I think particularly for the Clinton campaign, they're worried about results coming out of states like Pennsylvania and Colorado, where a month ago, Donald Trump wasn't even within striking distance. Now he is close to polling equal with her. If he can win the votes there, then there's no reason why he can't win enough electoral college votes to actually win the election. So this is a moment to concentrate minds very much. There are helicopters overhead. There's a lot of drama here, a lot of media, everyone waiting for the moment when Donald Trump, the performer, takes on Hillary Clinton, the politician.
Clinton, Trump, head-to-head for the first time on the same stage. The first presidential debate.
In this grim, pessimistic presidential contest, it's perhaps appropriate to sell the debate as a World Wrestling Smackdown.
The debate the nation's been waiting for, live on NBC.
Good evening.
The marketing may have changed, but the format, hardly at all.
The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy.
It's 56 years to the day since Americans watched the first televised presidential debate and judged the sweaty, unwell Richard Nixon inferior to the slick and youthful John F. Kennedy.
Only you can decide what you want this country to be, what you want to do with the future.
In America, these debates, we like to think they're about substance, and they are to some extent, but it's more a theater of character and personality. And in the case of this debate, the questions are, what about Donald Trump's temperament? Is he a hothead? Is he a guy who, if he has a finger on the nuclear button, is going to blow up the world? Or is he, at the age of 70, an adult? On Hillary Clinton's side, it's about if she comes off as truthful, as candid, as real.
So they have to kind of channel the opposites of their character then, don't they? She has to appear informal, relaxed, at ease, and he has to appear controlled.
That's exactly right. Whichever one adopts the other style better will win the theater of the debate.
Mr. President, have you looked at your pension?
You know, I don't look at my pension. It's not as big as yours. So
Whether you're Barack Obama or Ronald Reagan,
there you go again.
there's nothing more useful than the quick comeback.
cannot take
more energy tonight. I like that.
Look, I was asked
Donald Trump has already shown he's handy with the one-liner, also known as a zinger.
His visceral response to attack people on their appearance.
I never attacked him on his look, and believe me, there's plenty of subject matter right there. That I can tell you.
Donald Trump is nothing but zingers. That's what his tweets are. He has 11 million Twitter followers, and what is a tweet if not a zing, or an attempt at a zing?
In the age of social media, a shareable comment or a zing can be gold dust. Less shareable, old-fashioned notions of gravitas, detailed argument and experience.
I'm Hillary Clinton. I have been proud and privileged to serve as First Lady, as a senator from New York, and as Secretary of State.
Hi, I'm Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Hey, great name. I'm Val.
In a year when expertise is almost a disadvantage, world-weary Val met the comedy Mrs. Clinton and poked fun at her seriousness and ambition.
This has been so nice. You are really easy to talk to, Val.
Oh, thanks. You know, that's the first time I've ever heard that.
Oh, Val. I wish you could be president.
Yeah, me too.
You're fired.
While she's an effective extra, her opponent is a practiced performer. Donald Trump's reality show The Apprentice ran 14 seasons, and he was very much the star of the show. But tonight's debate is a different beast. Live television on the grandest of scales. 1,000-strong live audience inside the theatre, likely 100 million watching at home on TV. Team Trump trod the boards in rehearsal last night, Rudy Giuliani and former Breitbart editor Steve Bannon among them. But tonight it'll be Clinton stage left, Trump stage right, America's future in the balance.
Well, Kylie, how have the candidates been preparing?
Well, there's already been quite a bit of spin around, as you might imagine, about how each of the candidates is preparing. Donald Trump's campaign, I think, trying to communicate the idea that he's not really trying very hard. He apparently has participated in no mock debates, didn't turn up for debate rehearsals last night, whereas Hillary Clinton, we know, has been participating in mock debates. She is applying herself to this. Apparently someone has been standing in for Donald Trump, and they've been gaming which Donald Trump turns up. Will it be Donald Trump, you know, the kind of the blusterer, or will it be a gracious Donald Trump, trying to prepare for both of those outcomes? I think the issue, though, for Hillary Clinton is that really she has to make sure that she not only persuades people that they should not vote for Donald Trump, but also give people reasons as to why they should actually vote for her.
And some controversy, too, on real-time fact-checking by the moderator, right?
Yes, that has been swirling around for the last 24 hours or so. Lester Holt, who's a very well-respected NBC anchor, is the moderator tonight. He is under pressure, certainly from the Clinton campaign, to call out Donald Trump, who is prone to, let's say, sharing untruths at moments within the campaign. I think it stems from an event last week when Donald Trump talked about himself being opposed to the Iraq War, when there's evidence that he in fact supported the Iraq War. That wasn't corrected in real time, and there is pressure on the moderator to step in and make sure that that actually happens tonight. All we're hearing from NBC is that Lester will be no pot plant this evening, that he will not only be observing, but he will also be participating.
Kylie, thanks very much and enjoy the spectacle. And you can see the whole debate live here on Channel 4. Matt Fry will be on air from 1:45 in the morning with a special programme. But let's go over now to John, who's at Labour conference in Liverpool. John.
Well, welcome to Liverpool, where there's been a feast of old-style Labour promises from Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell. You don't have to whisper it, he declared. It's called socialism. But as delegates cheered calls for a higher living wage and a crackdown on tax-dodging companies, there are signs that Labour's divisions are papered over very thinly indeed. It's emerged that a key speech on Trident renewal was torpedoed at the very last minute. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
John McDonnell told Labour conference as Chancellor he'd bring in a living wage of £10 an hour.
Thank you.
Taking the lowest full-time annual salary to close to £20,000 a year. He was interested in bringing in a basic income paid by the state to all.
Wait till you hear what I've got to say.
And he would make sure £250 billion went into infrastructure spending in what was a new era.
The winds of globalisation are blowing in a different direction now. They're blowing against the belief in the free market and in favour of intervention. Good business doesn't need no government. Good business needs good government.
Mr McDonnell said his planned £100 billion extra borrowing put him on the same page as employers' organisations. They weren't so sure.
We have long been a supporter of balancing the books. We are still a supporter of balancing the books, and particularly in the light of the Q3 GDP numbers, we will want to really understand what this means for the long-term picture.
Sounds like a very polite way of saying you're not on the same page at all, and these numbers make your eyes pop out.
Well, I think we need to have a look at those pages. So, you know, these weren't very big numbers.
Come to me. Earlier in the day, while Jeremy Corbyn was posing with fellow anti-nuclear weapons protesters, his Shadow Defence Secretary was on the stage with a speech ready to promise delegates that the leadership wouldn't try to ban Trident in the coming years. It was part of a backroom deal between the leadership and its third biggest union affiliate. But just as Clive Lewis was about to deliver that line, he got a message that it had been deleted from his autocue by Mr Corbyn's senior aide.
As you know, I am sceptical about Trident renewal, as are many here in this room today. But I am clear that our party has a policy for Trident renewal. But I also want to be clear.
In the text Mr Lewis thought he was going to deliver, he was then going to make a promise.
But I am clear that our party has a policy for Trident renewal.
I would not seek to change Trident policy. Those were the words believed to be wiped at the last minute. By the time Mr Corbyn got into the hall, there was another surprise announcement.
So today I'm announcing that a future Labour government will ban fracking.
The energy spokesman was cheered for a sudden move to an outright ban on fracking. Unions with members in that sector weren't cheering.
We use gas because it's 4 times cheaper than electricity. Are the Labour Party saying you're going to rip out your gas boiler, replace it with electric heating and watch your bill go up fourfold? Doesn't sound like a winner for me in a manifesto commitment.
The General Secretary of Unite, the largest union affiliate, had a message for centre-right Labour MPs who opposed Jeremy Corbyn, and it wasn't very welcoming.
I say, conference, to the merchants of doom, in the words of Shakespeare's Henry V, if you have no stomach from this fight, depart the battlefield. Because, sisters...
Jeremy Corbyn's son on the left here, amongst those clapping enthusiastically. Away from the official conference, just down the road, an unofficial, alternative gathering. Many in the Momentum movement, spawned by Mr Corbyn's first leadership election campaign last year, prefer it here.
conference organisers didn't try and create an atmosphere like this down at conference. Hopefully next year, some of our guys will be on the conference arrangements committee and we can give it a real
it'll be more
buzz.
like this next
There'll
year.
be more music, more
It'll
dancing,
be more friendly,
comedy.
and it's just like, yeah.
Fewer suits.
Not that the Labour Party isn't friendly, but yeah, suits are a bit alienating.
These are the people who helped Jeremy Corbyn snatch power from the political establishment, who they think had lost principles in the search for votes, unlike their man.
Labour leaders prepared to stand on picket lines. You know, we haven't seen that if ever.
But they didn't do it because they thought they couldn't win elections if they did.
Well, I think this is the whole myth, isn't it? The reason they're losing elections is because they haven't been connecting with people.
It's not just about winning, it's about how you win. You know, if we win like Blair won, we'll be out in 10 years' time. If we win like Jeremy Corbyn's about to win, we're going to be in Parliament for a very long time.
And even if you don't win, you'll have been true to your principles.
Exactly, so we'll be able to sleep well at night.
Today saw some tensions emerge as the Labour leadership down the road tried to honour these ground troops while making deals to keep policy on Trident the same, trying to keep the Labour Party together while reinventing it.
And Gary's with me now. Well, Gary, a decisive shift left on the economy.
Yes, just starting with Trident. Well, what we were trying to explain in that piece there, what appears to have happened is that I think because they want to focus on the economy, the leadership has decided you can't have too many pots, you can't be fighting on too many fronts at the same time. So they've tried to make a deal on Trident. Some people seem to have been more enthusiastic than others about it in the leadership. The Shadow Defence Secretary, Clive Lewis, has been talking about how you can't keep revisiting Trident, picking a scab, he said, to a meeting yesterday. And it seems as though at the last minute some people weren't happy with the wording, but the fundamental thing to remember here is that, and senior union figures, by the way, think they have got that deal, that the Labour leadership is not going to revisit Trident. But the thing to remember here is that they're doing this because John McDonnell and others feel that the absolute priority is the economy. They feel there is a massive moment here when they can shift the centre of British politics, the focus of the debate, to an anti-austerity argument closer to the new left parties in Spain, in Greece, that kind of thing, making real progress on that front. And so I think willing, albeit a little uncomfortable, to have a few discomforts in other parts of the political garden.
And then on the economic front?
Well, they're making progress. I think John McDonnell will probably be feeling that he has shifted the debate in this party, and the way the leadership challenge worked, with the people on the other side saying, well, actually, don't worry, we're with you on this stuff, it's just the way you do it. I think that has left the door open, and he's charging through it.
Gary Gibbon, we're joined now by the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. And you splashed a lot of money about this morning, 250 billion basically on infrastructure and raising that minimum wage to above £10 per hour for workers. But you're going to be inheriting a situation in which the deficit will not have been paid off.
Yeah.
Yes, and credibility is everything.
I think we are going to inherit a mess. There's no doubt about it. The deficit won't have been paid off, and debt is now 1.6 trillion. So all the promises the Conservative gave us, they haven't delivered on.
But then on top of that, you're going to say, well, but we'll be spending even more.
The argument that organisations like the IMF, the OECD, and virtually every institution, economic institution in this country is saying now, is that the reason we're in this mess and we haven't reduced the deficit and we haven't paid off the debt is because we're not growing as an economy fast enough. And the only way to do that is to start investing. And it's what you do if you're a company. You'd invest in new equipment so you could produce the products that made you competitive. That's what we need to do now. So the 250 billion, I'm saying, for mainstream investment in infrastructure would help us then grow the economy. It's interesting. We're not just winning the argument in the Labour Party, we're winning it within the Conservative Party. One of the Conservative leadership candidates was putting forward £200 billion of investment. We're trying to say that we need mainstream investment in that way, modernise our infrastructure, and in that way we can grow the economy.
Well, the head of the CBI is saying, well, look, these are eye-watering figures. I'm going to have to take a look at them. But you're saying, well, they've signed off on them, really.
Well, the CBI and others, Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Small Businesses, are all talking about investment. The discussion is about the scale of investment and the time scale, and we're engaging in that dialogue with them. We're also saying, actually, we need to ensure that investment is spread throughout the country, not just in London and the South East.
Now, Trident, I mean, you're an implacable opponent, so is Jeremy Corbyn, and you do want it reopened at some point. But that element of the speech today was out the
But we
window.
want to prioritise our debates. Today we wanted to concentrate on the economy. On Trident, as we did in Parliament, we understand there's deep divisions about this, but that's
So
democracy.
you're reaching out to those more liberal...
We've always been reaching out, but on Trident in Parliament, for example, we gave a free vote because we understood it's a conscience issue. And that was what will happen in the party. People will be able to express their different views on this.
Now, Brexit, there isn't actually a debate on Brexit, but it has cropped up here, and particularly in the Composite Motion 1, which says, unless the final settlement proves to be acceptable, then the option of retaining EU membership should be itself retained. The final settlement should therefore be subject to approval through Parliament and potentially through a general election or a referendum.
Well, what we've said clearly in the debate...
But that is a change of policy.
Brexit has been discussed fundamentally in our economic debate today. And what we've been saying, we have to accept the referendum. It took place. We voted for the Referendum Act. It took place. We have to respect that view.
But there's a second chance.
Well, we've got to respect the decision that's made. Now what we've got to do is negotiate a new Europe and get the best deal for Britain we possibly can. That may have to be put back to the
If you look at the FT front page today, it's all about a hard Brexit, i.e. kick us out.
I think there's a real worry about the way the government's handling these negotiations. We're trying to ensure that we work with our socialist and social democratic colleagues right the way across Europe to get the best deal possible. So that means access to the single market.
Well, you're one of the few socialist parties that's in the ascendant. Many of them are in retreat.
But remember, the Socialist Party are the second largest group in the European Parliament, and they'll have a decisive say. So if we can bring them on side about giving us access to the single market, protecting employment rights, and ensuring that UK citizens in Europe...
I can hear those three musketeers that are negotiating.
Yes, that's the
I
problem.
can hear them saying, oh, good, yeah, we'll do that.
Well, that's the problem. The three musketeers in government at the moment seem to be falling out amongst themselves. They seem to be sword fencing each other more than they are negotiating on behalf of Britain.
John McDonnell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, we'll be back later to find out where voters think Labour is heading now, into political oblivion or towards a bright new future. For now, back to Cathy in London.
Thanks, John. Well, more now on tonight's main news on Syria. Syrian and Russian jets have pounded Aleppo yet again.
We covered a lot of ground in a
Activists say
short time.
240 people, including 38 children, have died since the temporary truce collapsed. Joining us now from Oslo is Jan Egeland, who's heading the United Nations Task Force on Humanitarian Access in the country. Mr. Egeland, Aleppo's residents believe that the international community has sentenced them to death. After this astonishing diplomatic failure, what now?
Well, I feel like the people of Eastern Aleppo, and indeed I would say that they have a right to say they've been let down by the international community. We've not been able to deliver any humanitarian relief of late. The only thing they're getting is massive rain of bombs. But of course, we're not giving up. We have, as the UN, Red Cross, Red Crescent, non-governmental organizations, dozens and dozens of trucks that are ready to go to Aleppo. We can go tomorrow, but then we need cessation of hostilities. We need access into the encircled area.
But it's increasingly fruitless, isn't it, to have those trucks on standby because Russia says there's no prospect of peace talks.
Well, I hope you're wrong, because in the last 5 days we were able to reach 6 other besieged areas. 4 of them last night, including Madaya, that you will remember was the place where people starved to death before this work that we're leading through the International Syria Support Group started. This was the first convoy since the end of April. It averted famine in Madaya. It can come back on track also for East Aleppo. The biggest mistake we could do is to declare Syria as hopeless, and the biggest call we can make is for US-Russian leadership. If they pull together, we will get into a better track on Syria. If they're not, there will only be chaos, and I'm assuring you there is no military solution to this war.
Has the UN ever felt more powerless, though, in the face of a crisis of this scale?
Well, I think there has been a lot of impotence really in very many conflicts. But no, I cannot remember in my more than 30 years as a humanitarian worker this kind of devastation through bombing and explosive weapons in highly populated areas as we've seen in eastern Aleppo the last 72 hours. And we have surely not seen the displacement of 11, 12 million people in one place as we've seen in Syria. So it is an unprecedented challenge. That is why we're calling for Russian and American, joint efforts again, and we're calling for the regional powers, Iran and Saudi, which are fueling, one side each at the moment, to also come to the senses and say, let's have a process, a peace process.
Very briefly, is there a fear that Aleppo will become a byword for barbarity in a way that Sarajevo has done Guernica in years gone by, a word that will echo down the ages?
Yeah, already it is like that. The iconic city of Aleppo has been a place for burials now for 5 years, but it can change. We need a cessation of hostilities. We need an agreement for humanitarian corridors into East Aleppo, and we need, again, talks in Geneva for a settlement of this conflict. As easy and as difficult as that. It's the only way out.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Now, a man serving life for murdering 2 women could be linked to 6 other killings, according to the former senior police officer who arrested him. Ex-detective Steve Fulcher claims Christopher Halliwell said police wanted to talk to him about 8 murders. Mr. Fulcher told this programme about the extraordinary moment Halliwell confessed to killing 2 women. But he's now questioning whether his former force did enough to examine Halliwell's potential links to other cases, as our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davies reports.
He's the cop who broke the rules and caught a killer. TV drama might lionise a man like Steve Fulcher. Real life, however, has been less charitable. But now this former detective is hitting back, and what happened to him, he says, should alarm us all.
If we are prioritising the right to silence over the right to life, then we are all sunk. Any party that could explain
2011, and Steve Fulcher was the lead detective on what was called a crime in action. 22-year-old office worker Sean O'Callaghan had gone missing after a night out in Swindon. A taxi driver called Christopher Halliwell soon became a suspect. He denied any knowledge of Sean when first arrested. Normally, he should have been taken straight back to the police station, but that's when Steve Fulcher decided to tear up the script.
There are no other operational options that I had available to me at all. And what I proposed to do was to plead with him for Sean O'Callaghan's life, which is what I did.
The first interview took place on a remote hilltop. Steve Fulcher consciously decided not to caution Halliwell to keep him talking. Halliwell talked and then led them eventually to Sean's body.
We got into the car. At this point, he was contrite. He was desperately trying to help. He was trying to check out where he'd deposited her. He'd rolled her down a 12-foot steep bank.
Halliwell had stabbed and strangled Sean O'Callaghan. It was here that he then asked the detective for a chat.
So I agreed, and we went to the off the track, off the road, and at that point he said, "Do you want another one?" I obviously asked him what he meant by that, and he said that he'd killed a girl in 2003, 4 or 5, couldn't remember the year. I asked him whether he could take me back to where she was. He said to the exact spot.
They'd end up in a field nearly 20 miles away. Steve Fulcher again deciding not to remind Halliwell of his right to silence.
It's not something that can be taught, how you interact with a serial killer and how you get them in their moment, their one moment of clarity in their entire life, to confess. It's a matter of a momentary bond that's formed between 2 people that is broken by choice of the wrong word. One wrong word and he would no longer feel inclined to confess. It was a surreal moment. The sun was really bright. Climbed over the wall And he paced one foot in front of the other to an exact spot and said, she's under here. So exact that I left Eddie Strange, the driver, on that spot and said, stay there until we get you a spade.
They'd later find nearby the remains of a young woman called Becky Godden, who'd gone missing from Swindon 8 years earlier.
We were able to provide a positive hit from the DNA database.
Fulcher had caught a double murderer. He was feted by his bosses, but not for long. The following year, his decision not to caution Halliwell was deemed so serious a breach of police procedure by a judge, the confessions were ruled inadmissible. There was other evidence to link Halliwell to Sian's murder, but the Becky murder conviction would take years to achieve.
He's from the Chief Constable, you say?
Fulcher was disciplined for this and for his dealings with the media, then resigned. He claims he's been hung out to dry and is calling for a change in the rules governing the questioning of suspects in certain cases, such as a potential kidnap.
You can't be sure what would have happened if you had followed the rules and taken him back to a police station. He may have confessed there.
I can be sure, because in 5.5 years following this event, he has never said a true word.
The police watchdog said quite clearly, these codes are not optional. They're there to protect the rights of suspects, and they must be protected. You must accept that.
Well, nobody in the whole 5.5 years has been able to explain to me the preferable course of action. And police officers in my position don't know where they stand. The public need to know, what will the police do in the event of their abduction or their loved one's abduction? And at the moment, we can't answer that question.
The Home Office has previously indicated it doesn't accept that the rules in this regard need changing. There is finally another aspect of this case which provokes Mr. Fulcher's ire, and it involves the true scale of offending by Christopher Halliwell, a murderer whose past he once looked closely at.
He had a traumatic childhood. He showed all the classic signs of psychopathy in terms of cruelty. His reaction to his mother, who is now dead, is that any mention of her, and particularly a picture of her, would send him into a frenzy of hatred.
That frenzy of hatred extended way beyond 2 murders, Steve Fulcher believes. Citing a phone conversation recorded in prison, he claims, in which Halliwell was heard saying the police wanted to speak to him about 8 murders, a figure the police didn't recognise.
Where did he get 8 murders from? It didn't come from me. I've got no idea how many murders he's responsible for. But clearly he made that indication. And when you look at everything we know about Christopher Halliwell, 8 is probably an underestimate.
The charge he now levels at his old employers at Wiltshire Police is that for over 5 years they failed to investigate Halliwell's potential links to other murders.
I'm calling for an immediate independent inquiry to examine the circumstances of this case and ascertain why Wiltshire Police failed to pursue an investigation into such a serious case.
Tonight, Wiltshire Police told Channel 4 News investigating Halliwell's other potential crimes has always been and remains a key aspect of their investigation. For Steve Fulcher, he'll return soon to Somalia to resume work as a security consultant. Doubtful, he says, that without fundamental change, any detective faced with similar circumstances would ever follow his lead.
Andy Davis reporting now. After the break, they voted Labour, but they also voted for Brexit. We've been to Accrington to find out what they make of Jeremy Corbyn. Is he leading Labour where they want to go? Here in Liverpool, Jeremy Corbyn won re-election by a landslide, but beyond Labour's ranks, there's evidence voters are less impressed. Our political correspondent Michael Crick travelled to Accrington in East Lancashire to hear more.
Like most of the East Lancashire mill towns, Accrington is Labour, but also strongly Brexit, having voted in June almost 2-1 to leave the EU. And that could spell trouble for Jeremy Corbyn and his party. In a poll conducted by YouGov last week, of people who said they voted Labour in 2015, but then voted Leave in the referendum in June, more than half said they wouldn't vote Labour next time, or They're simply sitting on the fence. They don't know who they'll vote for next time at all. In the town centre, a busker from Romania. A sign of how these parts have changed in recent years. But in the bakers next door, evidence of the problems that causes Labour politically.
I don't think Labour will do well in this area at all now. I think UKIP has certainly taken over in the Hyndburn area.
It's a strong Brexit area, this.
It is very strong indeed, yeah. Because we see the daily difference that the population has changed around here.
In Accrington's indoor market, it wasn't hard to find other voters once Labour put off by Corbyn.
He's an honest guy, but whether he's a leader, I'm not sure.
No, I don't think he's a leader.
Why not?
He's too weak. He's too far to the
left.
To the left, yeah.
Well, I don't know. All he asks is better health service, better working conditions, more work for people. I think there's no that's not left wing to me. That's okay.
Yeah.
If we want a better health service, which we haven't got now.
But he still wants immigration. He still thinks we should let everybody in. He's not fighting for what working people want, I don't think.
Well, immigration, we need it. The hospital is full of immigrant people that's working hard in that hospital. If we get rid of everybody, we'll have nothing left.
Oh, I'm not saying send them back. I'm saying don't let any more in.
We've been at the Labour Party conference.
Yeah.
Where the Labour Party's re-elected Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
Are you a Labour supporter?
Yeah.
What do you think of Jeremy Corbyn?
Rubbish.
Why is that?
He's an old clown. He's rubbish. He's not fit for anything, that one. He won't shoveling coal or something like that.
Would you still vote Labour?
I'll have to think about it now.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you see him as a future Prime Minister?
Get off it. You're joking.
But plenty of folk here see Labour's radical leader as a refreshing change.
A different politician.
Yes, in what way is he different?
He's for working class.
What, Jeremy Corbyn is?
Yeah, he's for working class.
He said he wants more social housing.
Sorry?
He wants more social housing.
More social housing, yeah. You've probably read they've re-elected Jeremy Corbyn as their leader. What do you think of Jeremy Corbyn?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some Labour MPs are saying he's a bit too left-wing and that Labour won't do very well under...
I think he's going back to Labour.
Going back to Labour?
Yeah. When we had Blair, it wasn't Labour, it was more like Conservative.
The man who's inspired Labour members in their hundreds of thousands now has the tougher challenge of inspiring Labour voters in their millions. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Accrington.
We're joined now by Sam Tarrier, co-director of the grassroots campaign Momentum and the director of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership election campaign, The Guardian columnist Zoe Williams, and the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson. Sam, let's start with you. And there was that sentiment in Accrington where they were complaining they didn't believe Jeremy Corbyn was tough enough on immigration or indeed supportive enough of Brexit.
I think that, to be honest, on the Brexit issue, I think Jeremy's healthy dose of Euroscepticism is actually probably a lot more of an accurate position, where obviously a majority of the British population are. I think we need to kind of get on the front foot, though, and actually start to say, look, what are the kind of red lines for people's Brexit? I mean, I think that's the sort of stuff you're going to see emerging already from John McDonnell, but also from Jeremy over the coming months, because if he doesn't talk about his serious economic strategy to actually turn those communities around, I don't think you even get a hearing over some of those issues around immigration.
There were some standing ovations in here today, and there were people sitting on their chairs too, and there was also a bit of noise. So how did you read it?
The really, truly weird thing about McDonnell, for sure, was that lots of things that he said could have been said by George Osborne. He was saying, clamp down on tax evasion, as a George Osborne point. He was saying, repeal the Trades Union Act. Ed Miliband would have said the same. There was nothing hugely radical. In fact, if you were to critique it from a Labour point of view, probably the only thing he would have said was that he didn't go in enough on Brexit. What I think the Labour Party has to do is to say, what do I actually disagree with here and what do I just not like about the person? Because at the moment they're in this kind of terrible bind where they hear a lot coming back at them, which is actually perfectly sound. And the only way they can dispute it is by attacking some very niche nonsensical thing about the person. And, you know, they have to have an idea, they have to have a kind of debate at the level of ideas, otherwise it's going to disintegrate, I think.
Well, from a spectator point of view, that's probably how you read it too.
Yeah, right now, it doesn't feel so much like a conference right now. It feels like a funeral. I mean, the members who were here around the table, it's true. The members who were here...
I'm not sure I've seen a standing ovation at a funeral.
But we should go outside this hall and you will see people who are crying into their beer, thinking we wanted to get rid of Corbyn, we failed. Now, this is the third of the Labour Party who were around at the last general election. They've now been joined by a group twice the size of them who have now taken over the party. Now, we have seen before the takeovership of a party leadership, but never of its members. So for 4 out of 5 Labour MPs who signed a no confidence motion against Jeremy Corbyn, they're realising right now, this week, that there's no way out for them.
Sam, a takeover of the party? And if so, are you pleased about it?
It's certainly not a takeover. I think it's actually the Labour Party going back to its values and its roots and saying, you know what, we lost 2 general elections. The right of the party have no strategy whatsoever really on the economy or to win a general election. The sort of electoral map and the sort of stitching together of a kind of UKIP, Dagenham and a sort of Islington Green is incredibly different, and they put forward no alternative way of doing that. And I think at least what we're doing is starting to say that's a possibility.
Like Trident. I mean, after all, there is the leadership absolutely foursquare behind getting rid of it. And what happens? They leave it. It's going to be rebuilt.
I think that, you know, it is a very controversial issue, and I personally am happy to sort of see it sort of kicked into the long grass, because I actually think we need to focus on bread and butter issues, and I think the sort of stuff around
not much bread and butter if they drop one of those things.
But listen, John, that's a really good point. If the only point of difference between us is Trident, that is not a very big point of difference. You could go to the Conservative Party, and if you ask them honestly, do you or do you not agree with it? Some of them would say no. I mean, that is not what makes a party.
But you're telling us, therefore, that British politics generally is in a sludge condition.
I'm telling you that British politics is fixating on small red line issues because they cannot have the conversation that they need to have. And they need to have a conversation about what exactly they disagree with about Corbyn's values. If they disagree with them profoundly, then fine. But name them. Don't just say Trident and run away.
Well, there's so many issues that these two tribes do not disagree on.
Well, OK, go for it.
Well, basically, should Labour be more left-wing?
No, Fraser, that's
a fundamental point. It's a fundamental point. Is the SNP a good thing?
Name an idea.
The Corbynistas think so, the old Labour MPs don't think so.
These are all umbrella points.
Foreign issues.
Name an idea. Name an idea that you disagree with.
Well, left-wingery, is that not an idea?
No, it's not. You have to actually name an idea.
Right, I agree with you, it's not much of a good idea, but it is an agenda right now.
No, it's really not. You have to define left-wing.
There has been research into this.
But there is a problem here. We've got more than half the party's MPs think he is incompetent, and they have to live with him in the Commons.
That is absolutely true. But just to go back to the left-wing thing, George Osborne, for example, would never have called himself right-wing, and yet he was right-wing. The fact is, you cannot define a person by what wing they're on. You have to say, here, I disagree with you. And the Labour Party MPs who disagree with Corbyn, they have to say, I don't agree with this idea. And as long as we keep on going with kind of, you know, left-wing, right-wing, Trident, not Trident, we're never going to get anywhere.
Do you see it that way?
I think the most exciting thing at the moment, no, I actually disagree with Fraser. I think that there are clearly a small rump of people that are beaten and they've lost, you know, an election in quite a huge way. But not only that, they've lost a battle of ideas. I think that's the sort of the more damaging thing for them. Their projects had run out of steam a very long time ago. Labour Party's now got more money, more members, and more ability, and more of a serious strategy to win a general election. I think it's had in a very, very long time.
It's the MPs you're talking about, isn't it? The MPs who you think, 4/5 of them, have run out of steam.
The conversations I'm having with MPs...
Is Labour electable?
Absolutely not.
Zoe?
Well, this is just silliness. You know, if you only talk about electability and you never talk about programmes, then you'll never get anywhere.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Sam, thank you very much indeed, Zoe and Fraser. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7. Until then, from Cathy in London, all of us here in Liverpool, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.